One of the questions that we might ask is the following. Loredana, what is a multilingual scholar? Or why is multilingualism important or necessary in research and scholarship?
Well, one should normally not start from negatives, but let me start with a little bit of myth busting and start from what a multilingual scholar is not or doesn't need to be. A multilingual scholar is not necessarily a specialist in languages and in multilingualism. A multilingual scholar also does not have to be someone who learns all the languages in the world, which is clearly an impossibility. Yet, all of us can be multilingual scholars in the sense that we can pay attention to language. And that means that what we need as multilingual scholars is what we can call a multilingual disposition. Someone who has a multilingual disposition is not just someone who speaks more than one language. It is someone who pays attention to language, someone who is sensitized to the role that language plays in all of our activities. And as researchers, in all of our research and the way that we communicate it, but also the way that we carry out the research itself, whatever the field that we're working in. We may be mathematicians or ethnographers. We may be specialists in literature or specialists in economics. But paying attention to languages and their plurality means that we're sensitized to the importance of that difference and that diversity, that as a scholar, I also know how much we often are pressurized by ourselves in the first instance to end up in what I call a performance of monolingualism. We may have multiple languages, but we associate our own professionalism with mastering maybe English or maybe another language is the prestigious language in our field. Now, that performance of monolingualism means that sometimes we can even have other languages, but we forget to use them. We forget to listen to them in our own work. Multilingual disposition means thinking about how we carry out our research, how we communicate our research in ways that are more effective and also more accessible to multiple groups of people. But it also means that as researchers, as scholars, as we listen to others more carefully. And if we listen to others, that means we listen to the diversity of languages, the diversity of cultures, the diversity of knowledges. Then we become also able to create effective and also equitable collaborations. There can be no equitable collaboration in the work that we do if there isn't that disposition. And so the last thing I would want to say is that thinking about language, not being language indifferent, not falling into performances of monolingualism, listening to other knowledges and other languages means that we are also reminded constantly that when we research, what we do is not exporting knowledge and is not extracting knowledge. It really should be about collaboration. And being multilingual scholars reminds us of that all the time.
I want to raise another question, but before I do that, I want to add quickly to what Loredana was saying. That's extremely inspiring. If you think about a person who speaks, uses, understands multiple languages, which most scholars do around the world, think about them as craftspeople. Why would you stop those craftspeople from using both hands? Telling someone to only use English or Hindi or whatever dominant language is to tell them to use only one hand because they have two. In fact, I would take that metaphor a step further and say the craftsperson has many tools in their tool set. Why would you ask them to use the same tool to do all of the things? You can't use an axe to dig the garden, to peel your potato, to pare your nails. Don't do that. It's dangerous. Use all of the tools, depending on what it is that you want to do. Or use another metaphor, vehicles. Different vehicles are able to go on different terrains. Why would you stop a traveler from using different vehicles to get to different places? We have access to knowledge through languages. And other people need to access the knowledge that we create. In fact, it is for them on public dime, oftentimes, in their name, for the sake of improving life or profession, occupation, or market, or whatever that is, for the mass that we are doing this research. We kill the very why of our research if we only use one language and refuse to use other languages, which we refuse to let other people use different languages, especially when we exercise power as professors upon our students. To insist that they only use one hand, one vehicle, is unjust.
Now, the beauty of that metaphor of using both of your hands is that it's not like that craftsman uses, their left hand to do something, their right hand to do something completely different. Those two hands, when they come together, do much more because they're coming together in a skilled, intelligent way. You can be a very skilled pianist if your two hands, while doing two different things, can feed off each other. And with our languages, that's what we do, because we bring those different knowledges into context.
So in Module 1, we're looking at 3 dimensions of research. One was develop your research agenda as an intellectual mission, as a disciplinary mission. Second, think about what you're going to contribute to society. Therein comes the necessity of using all your languages, or at least making it accessible. The third dimension of research agenda, which was justice that we discussed in our first module, that can be achieved much more significantly if we do not refuse to engage different linguistic communities, contribute knowledge in different languages that we already know very much. But I want to raise another question. I think a lot of colleagues will, when they listen to this first segment, will have this question in their minds. English is a language of global communication, and everyone wants to improve it. What would you say to any scholar who is not interested in using other languages, say because they're not very rewarded by their institutions or their policies? Is it not enough, say from that scholar's perspective, for them to publish and share knowledge in English? Because this is, according to them, the language of global communication, and this is where they get the reward and may even be required to write in English. What would you say to that scholar?
Yeah, I think this is a really tricky question. So I don't think that, there is just like one fixed set of answer, but based on my observation, working with colleagues from the global south, particularly in Nepal, I can say that we have been reproducing very firmly this ideology of, writing in English only as a form of, legitimate writing, right? So we haven't really demonstrated, or we haven't really shown to the academic writers or researchers that we can also do academic writing multilingually. So it's not wrong to believe that, writing in English gives kind of resource or global capital. I don't blame the colleagues having that kind of belief because, our institutions, our universities, for example, research institutes, we have established, systemically, we actually, in many ways, right? Sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly through our practices, we have sent or given a message to our colleagues that if you write in English, your profile will be globally visible. Your citation index, the numerical calculation of let's say scholars making impact, right? All these principles that our institutions have embraced and constantly forcing us to be part of that actually is contributing to have this kind of assumption, and English becomes a tool to achieve those goals that our institutions have established so far. So the problem lies in kind of like system, right? Or universities that we, the ideologies that our universities, our institutions, carry. So the first thing that I see in academic writer is the struggle, right? The sense of struggle they have when they start thinking about writing in English, right? Rather than seeing what they have, right, as a resource. For example, they have linguistic knowledge, they have very wonderful ideas, right? And they have experiences, right? They have their own stories to tell in writing, right? For example, I work with in-service teachers most often. They have very wonderful ideas, knowledge, and they know what to write. But when they are asked to write in English, they are forced to actually write in English, right? And most often, they are not well prepared. They are not really mentored, and they don't have adequate skills to actually organize their knowledge and communicate, to the audience. So what I'm basically saying is that is one issue, but the major issue is, do they really need actually to write in English? Why? Because I mean, again, who are the audience, right? So they are writing, as if, when I ask them, who are your audience? Who do you expect to read your paper? So mostly their colleagues, right? For example, if teachers are writing, they want their colleagues, in-service teachers in Nepal to read their paper, and maybe they will benefit from their writing, for example, right? But
I don't think anybody in Britain is reading to learn how to teach, from them. Maybe some, but not primarily. Yeah.
Not primarily. And what happens is English becomes like a de facto language of academic writing, and they think that, I should write in English. Why? Because that is what I get often from my colleagues, right? Why? Because, academic writing should be in English, right? Because everyone is writing in English. That's another response. Everyone is writing in English, for example. I haven't seen anything in, for example, Nepali or other languages in the context of Nepal, right? So the point, what I'm trying to make is we haven't given the model of good academic writing in other languages.
Or influence the policy, or
influence the policy.
Try to change the political, ideological landscape. Yeah.
For example, no, I think it sounds like, I'm having very complicit views, but which is okay, right? But look, I'm because I was not really taught, in any academic writing in the language that
in other languages,
my first language, let's say, right? I'm not talking about personal thing. It's kind of like more ideological and very systemic. It's an issue.
Let me pause you right there and pose a question just to follow up on that. One of our speakers in Module 1 video, Professor Hammond, said maybe you can allocate some time to do the thing that you love and some time to do the thing that you need to. So 60-40 or a 70-30. I was wondering if our scholars can begin to write scholarship in the broad sense of engaging the community, learning with each other on social media, on blogs, in multiple genres. If we as you show in this module, they could probably mobilize different languages in different genres and different contexts and different purposes and different audiences. If they refuse to do that and then tie one of their hands in the back and try to use the left hand, which is English, and tie the right hand in their back, I'm thinking of right-handed people, then it is to their disadvantage rather than to their advantage. So maybe they should come out of this thinking that if they use languages other than English, they lose anything. No, they actually don't. They generate better ideas, they talk to more people, they speak more effectively, they make a bigger impact. And then ultimately, their English language communication and writing might also significantly improve. So, let us go back to that scholar who's resisting or hesitating or afraid. And can you give some tips? Like I was beginning to say, allocate some time for other languages, some space for other languages, or, think of it as a positive way. What are some practical tips you would give to that scholar? Give them some courage, give them some inspiration.
Thanks, Sam. So I don't really quite believe in this kind of tips thing, right? Because there are so many things to fix, right? And it's not like fixing it kind of stuff, right? But what I begin, how I begin basically would be like, what is scholarship, right? Basically, what we are actually forgetting so far is the knowledge, right? Which is the core of scholarship, right? In case of writing, for example, we just focus on English, in the English language, right? Not the knowledge, right? So I think that the first thing that I would focus is, what is scholarship and what do you want to pursue by doing academic writing, right? So I think that's the first thing is knowledge. So it can be in Nepali or it can be in other languages. The first thing is I would engage the writers in the discussion around the purpose of their writing. Why are they writing? And these two components of scholarship balanced in the writing.
Thank you. I have the next question for my colleague Nella. In addition to using multiple languages, what are some of the diverse genres of communication that we need as scholars for making a greater impact in society? Because languages and genres are both tools that could be mobilized in much the same ways in many cases. What additional stakeholders, as a follow-up, or audiences are we able to reach or engage through these genres in addition to multiple languages?
Thank you, Sam, for that really important question. And thanks also to Loredana and Pren for outlining what I think is the critical value of leveraging all of our linguistic, but also cultural repertoires, so that we might be really able to more meaningfully engage in research that makes this real social impact. I was really fascinated by the last few moments of Prem's contributions, but also listening to Loredana and to Sam asking us to recall a move toward a multilingual disposition. And I think that I really appreciate that, because I think that disposition it forces us to rethink our understanding of difference. And in researching for social impact, very specifically, the idea of difference does make a difference. And it's not just linguistic difference that we should be thinking and writing in leveraging other languages, and certainly not just the focus on the sort of classic so-called prestige languages, but as you're pointing out, the need to look at other genres. And I think it's important for us to think about the ways that we use language, and as well as diverse genres of communication, to empower or to silence, to focus on deficits or to explore strengths, to privilege or to oppress, to make change or maintain systems of power. We have to think about the fact that we want to do this for social impact. And so we need to, again, make very clear, deliberate choices, as I spoke about in Module 1. We need to make the deliberate choice to employ different genres of communication so that we can really reach and engage much broader audiences and a multiplicity of stakeholders. Working with genres that are generally not immediately associated with traditional academic contexts, such as presses, the large publishing units, peer-reviewed journals, well, these help us to reach the audiences that are very often the most impacted by your research agendas. You also might reach stakeholders that are on the ground, that have more abilities to consider and actually incorporate your research into actionable solutions for the very people you say you wish to, you hope will benefit from the work, the research that you're doing. I think that a wide range of communications tools, of spaces, types of communications really allows for that expansion. And so why do we do it? Think about connecting with your existing. So you have an existing audience, but you should be thinking about your possible audience and your desired audience, the possible or the potential. That's where I think these different, communicating in these different genres will help you not only use other languages, because very often certain genres are actually appearing in languages other than the sort of larger, more commonly spoken, the acceptable languages. This gives us the opportunity to build upon and to think about new, innovative, completely different ideas that you would never have thought about before, because you're bringing more people to the table, because you're crossing disciplinary boundaries, as we discussed in Module 1, because you're at the intersection of disciplines, which is where the richness of new ideas, the synthesis of ideas comes to be. And in doing that, you will also, in many cases, enable yourself to use other languages that you have, because as I mentioned earlier, many of these potential genres often are actually appearing in the languages of the groups of people, of the audiences that you wish to impact. A couple of really quick suggestions before I close. One of them is obvious, but I don't think we're using it really quite the same way. And I have to say that I myself am guilty of this. So social media, don't think about where your current audience is, but where is your potential audience? Where does the audience that you want to be your desirable audience spend their most time? Is it on Twitter? Is it on Instagram? Is it on Facebook or any other other platforms. This gives you a chance to engage and speak to audiences in ways that you wouldn't have thought that you might be able to speak, and also gives you a chance to try out new ideas before you bring them to the so-called academic spaces, because that's what's required of us. But in order to really make the social impact, go to these genres, like, for example, open access journals that anyone can access. I'll give you an example. In Latin America, 1/4 of open access journals are accessed by the general public, audiences that are not associated with the university community. Using preprint platforms before your manuscript is written or ready to be sent out, there are platforms that allow you to share your work before the formal review process begins, and you're able to really put your ideas out there. And very often these platforms are multidisciplinary in nature, reaching audiences beyond the academic spaces. Other interesting genres could be crowdsourcing and collaboration platforms that help researchers outside of academia and in academia come together to research and share ideas for practical and impactful change. I'm thinking of things like Just One Giant Lab and something called Linknovate. But also I'm going to end on this note. Using the arts, visual graphics example. Some of my scientist grad students have been working with science comics or graphic style work to really get at some of their research. They're using tools like Data Hero or Notagar to really leverage the use of arts and visuals and graphics in order to make that data come alive and get people excited outside of the academic context in order to really make meaningful, impact and collaborations. Who are those stakeholders? The stakeholders are the very people, the communities that we claim in academia to be assisting and supporting, and we just never do that, frankly, in these traditional outlets. So you're going to be reaching the people for whom you say, or we say, this research is for. People who make policy, those are other stakeholders. People who are in positions, in administrative, hierarchical positions in society, in the community, to make these kind of impacts. And another audience, of course, is the next generation, those who will live with the kinds of decisions that are made because of the research that we're engaged in. So I hope these potential areas and places, genres for communication, but also are genres and stakeholders that you'll consider beyond the classic academic context. Okay.
Yeah, I would like to follow up on that question of impact and of social impact, of impact also beyond academia that Nella so wonderfully outlined for us. To then ask Lisa, how does multilingual and multi-genre scholarly communication leverage and make possible really this social impact and advance that social justice which the participants of these in this training, in these units, have been reading about, listening about?
Thank you, Loredana. So I have a few ideas about this, building off of much of what has been said already. I think as we think about, for example, how we as practitioners and as researchers might explore critical approaches across the literature, we can think about drawing from the cross-disciplinary literature, right? This is something that I have done in my own work in looking at what has been termed intersectional programs. There has been discussion of intersectional programs in nursing, in social work, in education, and much of that work informs, right, the development of programs across sectors. So I think that it is key to be looking always across professional fields and thinking about the constructions of those fields across national settings. We know that that's a key point for us to consider, with terms also varying across settings, linguistic settings and national settings, right? So to take one particular example, in higher education, we often see policy work that focuses on the diversity or the equity statements of different higher education institutions. But within those statements, right, there is such a range of terms used to refer to, at some points, similar concepts, and at other times using the same word but using it very differently, which refers back to distinct national histories, right? Of, for example, immigration, economics, legal protection, educational access, racialization. And I think in this particular case, right, we could say that those phenomena, they intersect and they operate in parallel across all national settings, but how they intersect and how they operate in parallel is distinct. And we really have to probe, right? I think both linguistic difference and disciplinary gaps in order to get at what some of those distinctions are. I think that by reading, watching, and listening to the perspectives of community members, practitioners, and scholars in as many languages as possible, it allows us to try to get to the root, right, of how different folks understand some of these phenomena across national settings, and of course, again, linguistic contexts. And I'll just move then to two specific takeaways, I think, for people. These are things that I have found helpful. So the first is signing up for the newsletters of not-for-profit organizations and other community actors in different countries and in different languages allows you to get a sense of what those actors are working on in real time, right? The kind of literature that they are referring to, the grants that they're offering to their community members, right? So what are the projects that are actually happening and unfolding in real time? I don't think there's any substitute for that. And then the other thing is, to use technology, right? We just heard about thinking about our social media use, but also thinking about setting up alerts in Google, Web of Science, or other databases for key terms that interest you in your work, but those key terms in different languages so that it's popping up for you, right, in your inbox. Who's writing about this? And again, that likely will span disciplinary boundaries, but I think it's really useful to see that.
I love the genres of consumption as well as the genres of production being diverse.
Yes.
Other colleagues?
Yeah, I think those points are so fundamental, and the way in which linguistic boundaries and social boundaries and disciplinary boundaries have to all be there at the forefront of our thought, precisely because we want our research to be important, to make a difference. That concept of difference that Nella was talking about earlier. Well, not only do we want to remember about and value difference, but we also want our research, our work to make a difference. And if we don't reach those different audiences, if we don't think consciously about the way in which we can reach those audiences, then we're missing out on the impact, on the legacy of what we do. And so I think that is fundamental. Thinking always in terms almost like an activist when we're doing this.
I think this is really interesting point because when we write, or there is a very dominant assumption that writing is always very much standardized, there are patterns, there are rules, and there are certain systems that you have to follow. It is more scripted always, right? But if we talk about social impact, we should also start thinking about or rethinking about our own ways of writing, right, across disciplines, for example. For example, incorporating or bringing in very small piece of art right, would make us write more confidently and make us kind of confident in communicating our messages. It may not be the same for different disciplines. For example, science and technology. For example, I talked to some colleagues in science and technology in Nepal, and they keep telling me that, okay, in our field, in science and technology, we don't have words, specific language to describe so-called scientific concepts in Nepali, for example, or in their home language or in their mother tongue. So they have to use English, right? These kind of deficit views are there. We also need to diversify the knowledge, right? The knowledge that exists in different languages, but we just think that, okay, there is no such knowledge in that particular language, right? And there is no such writing in that particular language, or diverse ways of writing. For example, bringing in arts, maybe in different cultures, in different communities, bringing in knowledge that is different from the knowledge that we actually embrace as knowledge, right, or legitimate knowledge, or bringing in even the ways of communicating, right? For example, not just art, maybe sometimes other forms of performances. For example, storytelling. Even storytelling is very powerful in different languages. So we really need to help writers to find their own space as a comfortable space, or the space of comfort, right, where they actually they begin writing, rather than telling that, okay, these are the rules that we should be following in writing, and this is the standard pattern, and this is what we should be doing, or I should be doing. So we really need to begin with what resources the writers actually have, not just language, but also knowledge and the patterns of communication, or the communication styles as well. So and also one tip that I would like to highlight, and that has been really useful for me, is we keep separating languages, right? Isolating languages in different boxes. Like, okay, I should write in English only, or I should write in my home language, or Nepali only, for example. But it doesn't work that way, right? Writing doesn't work out that way. So it's really important to see what resources we have in our language. And I think we really need to see it, all linguistic resources, as really total, and then in a more holistic sense, right?
Prem, I couldn't agree more. And that, I think, is what I was referring to at the beginning of this conversation when I was talking about performances of monolingualism. Sometimes we ourselves confine ourselves in these silences. And although we are multilingual, we behave as if we were not, which is exactly what you've been describing. And instead, precisely what you said, mobilizing that full repertoire, and not self-censoring also ourselves, I think is really fundamental in terms of our creativity as well as everything else.
Thank you very much, colleagues. This was
phenomenal,
a riveting, interesting, engaging conversation. Thank you very much for your time. One thing that I would highlight for the colleagues that are completing this module is that when you are thinking about publishing, presenting, communicating, engaging, translating, connecting with different stakeholders in different languages, different genres, is to think not in terms of what this will take away from me. If I don't publish this article in English, but instead do it in another language, or if I speak in another language instead of English, how would it take away from me? That's not the right approach. That will not benefit you. What we are trying to say here today is that it will simply add more opportunities, even if it doesn't seem to at the first step. It always is adding a new dimension, a new connection, a new opportunity, a new collaboration, a new space. Think of it that way. More genres, more languages, more stakeholders, more opportunities, more performances. They will add ultimately to the strength of the foundation of your research, to the application of your research, to the implications of your research. Think about what they will give you, not what they will take from you. Think about what you can give back as well. It's a give and take process. When you multiply, when you diversify, there is nothing negative about diversification. Opportunities, ideas, motivation, respect, satisfaction, all of them will multiply with diversification of language, genre, and stakeholders. And what we're saying is not that this is for language people like Loredana and other colleagues have highlighted. It is not only for the linguists, not only for the people that engage with language. Unless you are a scientist or an engineer or a doctor who does not use any language, any human language, but speaks in secret code or body language, then what we're saying today is relevant. Because all of us are always languaging. We are communicating language, and language is always implicated in politics and power. You're either allowing another person to speak multiple languages, you're either speaking in multiple languages or not. You're either increasing the opportunity and access to your knowledge for more people, or you're not. You're either maintaining the status quo, or you are taking that step toward making your knowledge more accessible to a few more people. And if you feel good about it, do it. If you don't feel comfortable right now, try it. We can guarantee to you that you'll be happy in the end. You'll have made a big difference, especially to the next generation of people that Nela was talking about earlier. Look in the eyes of your children and your neighbors' children who don't speak the same language and say whether your knowledge is accessible to them, whether it will be a tool in their hands as well, be a vehicle with which they can go places as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This was really exciting
Thank you very much.
to hear and be part of. Thank you.